Grace ignored the fury burning in Scarlet's eyes, pressing the last of their rent money into the beggar's hand. "Here," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Get something to eat, you absolute fool!" Scarlet hissed the moment they walked away, her voice trembling with rage. "He's playing you. While you starve, he laughs." That money was for our rent. Behind them, the beggar named Daniel watched her go. The crumpled bills clutched tight, a strange, calculating light flickering deep within his observant eyes. Who was he really? The city exhaled the day's heat as dusk began to bleed, purple and orange across the sky. Students and office workers hurried along the sidewalks, a river of tired faces, heading home or towards the flickering neon promises of the evening. Among them walked Grace and Scarlet, their university backpacks slung over their shoulders, familiar companions on this daily trek back to their small, shared apartment. Grace kept pace, her eyes scanning the bustling streetscape with quiet observation, a familiar weariness settling into her bones. Beside her, Scarlet adjusted the strap of her designer knockoff bag, sighing dramatically. Ugh, Professor Davies was so unfair today. Can you believe he only gave me a B+ on that presentation after all the work I put in? Grace murmured a non-committal agreement, her attention snagged by something further down the block. A figure slumped against the grimy brick wall of an aging building, partially obscured by the flow of pedestrians. Another beggar, she thought initially, her heart giving its usual sympathetic pang. But as they drew closer, she stopped. This one was different. He was young, perhaps their age, maybe a little older. His clothes were torn, stained, hanging loosely on a frame that hinted at missed meals. His face was etched with exhaustion, smudged with city grime. Yet beneath the hardship, there was an unexpected structure. Sharp angles, a strong jawline, surprisingly handsome, and his eyes. They weren't vacant with despair or glazed over. They were fixed on the street alert, observant with an unnerving focus that seemed out of place amidst the squalor. It was as if he were analyzing the flow of life around him, not just passively existing within it. "Let's help him," Grace said softly, already reaching for her worn purse. Scarlet frowned, stopping beside her with an impatient tap of her foot. "Help who, Grace?" "Seriously? Look around. If you give money to every sob story on the street, you'll be sitting next to him before you know it." Her voice held that familiar edge of pragmatic cynicism. "But he looks really hungry." Scarlet, Grace countered her gaze, fixed on the young man. "And we have extra money to waste." Scarlet shot back, lowering her voice slightly. "Need I remind you the rent is due in 2 days?" 2 days, Grace? And we're still short." Grace flinched. Scarlet was right. The money in her purse wasn't extra. It was part of their carefully scraped-together rent fund, essential non-negotiable. The landlord wasn't known for his patience. A familiar tug-of-war started in Grace's chest, the landlord's stern reminder echoing in one ear, the silent plea in the young man's posture pulling at the other. For a moment, practicality warred with compassion, but compassion won. It usually did with Grace. Ignoring Scarlet's sharp intake of breath, Grace stepped forward, bending down slightly. The young man looked up as her shadow fell over him, shock widening those surprisingly intense eyes. She held out a few carefully folded bills, not much, but enough for a decent meal. "Here," she said kindly, her voice gentle. "Buy something to eat." He stared at the money, then up at her, as if verifying she was real. His lips parted, and a thank you emerged, barely a thread of sound, raspy from disuse or hunger. "The thank you, ma'am." The formality felt oddly incongruous, and his gaze held hers for a fraction longer than expected, direct and searching before dropping back to the money in his hand as if it were treasure. "You're too soft, Grace," Scarlet hissed, as Grace straightened up and rejoined her people like that. "They know how to play on sympathy. He probably makes more in a day than we do in a week." She punctuated her statement with an elaborate eye roll. "Oh, Saint Grace and her charity cases," she muttered under her breath. Grace didn't rise to the bait, simply starting to walk again. "Let's go." As they continued their journey, the silence stretched thick with Scarlet's disapproval. Finally, Scarlet sighed loudly. "Well, now you've really done it. That was part of the rent money, wasn't it? Now we're even shorter. All because you had to play Mother Teresa." She glanced sideways at Grace. What if he was just pretending? What if he laughs the second we turn the corner? Grace took a deep breath, the city noise seeming to fade for a moment. If he was pretending, Scarlet, that's between him and his conscience. But if he was genuinely hungry, then at least I did something. Did something. Scarlet scoffed. "You just made our lives harder. That's why people walk all over you." "Grace, you're too nice for your own good." Grace remained silent. She knew Scarlet's worldview was different, shaped by a desire to escape their modest reality. Scarlet constantly spun tales of wealthy parents living abroad, a stark contrast to the truth Grace knew. That Scarlet's parents, like her own, lived simple lives back in their hometown village. Scarlet guarded that truth fiercely, preferring the illusion of effortless privilege. The small apartment they finally reached felt even smaller than usual under the weight of unspoken tension. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, Scarlet tossed her bag onto the lone armchair and whirled around, arms crossed, her expression hard. "Okay, Grace," she said, her voice dangerously level. "Let's talk rent, your share." Now. Grace looked down at her hands, the image of the young man's shocked face still vivid in her mind. She took a steadying breath. "Scarlet, I don't have all of it right now, because I gave some—" Scarlet's eyes flashed with anger. What are you kidding me, Grace? After what I just said?" The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence, the first crack appearing in the fragile foundation of their shared life. The following days settled into a tense rhythm in the small apartment. The rent had been paid just barely after Grace picked up an extra shift at the campus library, sacrificing precious study time. Scarlet offered no help, only pointed remarks about the dwindling groceries and Grace's misplaced priorities. Despite the strain, or perhaps because of it, Grace found her thoughts drifting back to the young man on the street corner. She couldn't shake the image of his intense eyes, the flicker of something more than just hardship behind them. Twice that week, under the guise of taking a longer route home, Grace detawned a small, carefully wrapped package of leftovers tucked into her bag. The first time she'd almost convinced herself he wouldn't be there, that her act of kindness had been a fleeting encounter, but he was leaning against the same brick wall, though perhaps sitting a little straighter. His face lit up with faint surprise, then undeniable relief when he saw her approaching. "You came back," he stated, a hint of wonder in his voice. Grace offered a small smile, handing him the food. "I brought you something." He accepted it gently, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. He said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips as he unwrapped the simple meal of rice and beans. "My regular delivery service. 5 stars. The unexpected humor, light and dry, caught Grace off guard. She laughed softly, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Just glad I found you." She hesitated, then asked, "I'm Grace, by the way." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly again. "It's good to meet you, Grace. I'm Daniel." As he ate, slowly, savoring each bite, he shared fragments of his story, the generic heartbreaking tale of an orphanage upbringing, aging out of the system at 18, the struggle to find work when you carried the mark of the street upon you. Nobody wants to hire someone who looks like this, he said with a resigned shrug, gesturing to his worn clothes. They take one look and assume the worst. Grace listened, her heart aching with sympathy. Later, trying to be practical, she offered some simple advice. Have you tried the cafes over on Elm Street? Sometimes they need dishwashers or help in the back. Daniel listened politely, his expression thoughtful. I appreciate the suggestions, Grace. Truly. He paused, glancing at a nearby newsstand where headlines screamed about economic downturns. It's a tough market out there, though. Seems like even the big corporations are feeling the pinch. Restructuring shifts the pressure downwards, doesn't it? His comment, insightful and articulate, sounded jarringly sophisticated, coming from someone in his apparent situation. Grace blinked, unsure how to respond, filing it away as another curious detail about him. He listened to her earnest suggestions, a pang echoing in his chest. Her simple kindness was exactly what he'd hoped to find, yet the lie separating them felt heavier each day. Meanwhile, Scarlet navigated her own world, one built on carefully constructed illusions. At university, Grace overheard her regaling a group of impressionable younger students. Oh, Daddy was furious. I chose this university, Scarlet declared, waving a dismissive hand. He wanted me at Oxford, naturally, but I insisted on experiencing life authentically, you know. He still sends me a ridiculous allowance. Poor darling worries so much. Later, showing off a picture on her phone, she casually remarked, Mummy just bought me the most divine, Chanello handbag for my birthday. Isn't it fabulous? The mispronunciation hung in the air unnoticed by her eager audience, but a clear signal to Grace of the flimsy facade Scarlet maintained. That evening, the tension in the apartment reached a new level. The shared pantry was looking bare, and Scarlet's frustration boiled over Grace. We can't keep living like this, she snapped, slamming a cupboard door shut. Scraping by eating plain rice, while you're out playing savior to stray beggars. Grace flinched but stood her ground. We manage Scarlet, and Daniel is a person, not a stray. Scarlet let out a humorless laugh. She moved closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Look, I know things are tight, but I might have a solution, a way to make things easier. She paused for effect. I know this older gentleman, Mr. Henderson, very successful, very appreciative of young company. Her eyes held a knowing gleam. He helps girls out and clothes nice dinners, provided you're friendly. Keep him happy. It's easy money, Grace. Think about it. No more. Worrying. Grace stared at her horrified, a cold wave washing over her. Scarlet. No, absolutely not. Her voice trembled with indignation. You're talking about selling yourself. How could you even think of that? Let alone suggest it to me. Scarlet recoiled, her expression twisting into a sneer. Oh, don't get all high and mighty. Miss Purity, it's the real world out here. Money talks while you're scrubbing floors for minimum wage. Some of us are smart enough to find easier ways. She tossed her hair back defiantly. Fine. You want to suffer for your precious principles. Go right ahead. Starve in your little corner of integrity. Just don't come crying to me when you can't even afford instant noodles next week. The words, sharp and cruel, drew a line in the sand between them. Grace felt a profound sense of isolation, but also a surge of defiant certainty. She would never compromise her values no matter how difficult things became. Their paths were diverging sharply now, one towards a dangerous precipice, the other clinging steadfastly to a difficult but honest climb. Grace's brief moments with Daniel became anchors in her increasingly stressful week. The apartment remained thick with Scarlet's disapproval, a silent, cloying smog. Yet seeing Daniel, even for a few minutes, sharing a small meal, felt like a necessary act of defiance against the encroaching cynicism of her world. Her concern for him, however, was rapidly morphing into genuine anxiety. She knew he was resourceful, surprisingly articulate, but the streets were unforgiving. One chilly afternoon, as she handed him a thermos of hot soup, she finally voiced the question, nagging at her Daniel. "Where do you actually stay at night when it gets cold like this?" He hesitated, stirring the soup with a plastic spoon she'd included. His gaze drifted towards a looming skeleton of concrete and steel, visible a few blocks away, an abandoned construction project that had stalled years ago. "There's an unfinished building over there," he admitted quietly. "Top floors mostly empty. Blocks. The wind mostly." Grace's blood ran cold. An abandoned building, exposed, unsafe, filled with unknown dangers. "Daniel, that's not safe. Anything could happen. It's freezing at night now, and who knows who else might be sheltering there." He offered a wry smile, though it didn't quite reach his observant eyes. "Don't worry about me, Grace. I'm tougher than I look." He attempted a lighter tone. "Besides, I've befriended the rats. We have an understanding." The attempt at humor fell flat against the stark reality of his situation. As they sat in silence for a moment, a rough-looking man stumbled down the sidewalk, muttering aggressively towards them. Before Grace could even react, Daniel shifted almost imperceptibly. His body tensed. His posture changed subtly, positioning himself slightly protectively between her and the approaching man. His eyes, usually thoughtful, hardened into chips of flint, tracking the man's erratic movements with sharp, unwavering focus. It was a fleeting transformation, a glimpse of coiled readiness that seemed utterly at odds with his beggar persona. The man lurched past, oblivious, and Daniel relaxed just as quickly, turning back to Grace as if nothing had happened. She'd seen it, though, that brief, intense flicker of something disciplined, something dangerous. She tried to brush it off as street smarts, a necessary defense mechanism, but the image lingered. Meanwhile, Scarlet's carefully crafted world was showing its own signs of stress. Grace walked in one afternoon to find Scarlet pacing the small living room phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low, furious whisper. "No, I told you. I can't ask Dad for more. Right now, just stall them. I'll figure something out." She slammed the phone down her face, pale with anger and something close to panic. Later that week at a campus cafe, Grace saw Scarlet cornered by a well-meaning but persistent classmate. "Scarlet, darling, I was just telling Maria. I saw someone who looked exactly like your mother working at that little bakery on Miller Street the other day. Isn't that funny?" Small world Scarlet froze, her fake smile faltering. My mother," she stammered, color draining from her face. "Oh, no, that couldn't be her. She's in Switzerland, visiting my aunt's chalet." "Yes, terribly busy." She laughed, a high-pitched, brittle sound, quickly changing the subject to a piece of campus gossip, leaving the classmate looking slightly confused. Grace, watching from a nearby table, felt a flicker of pity mixed with exasperation. The frantic energy Scarlet poured into maintaining her lies seemed exhausting. That night, the worry about Daniel became unbearable for Grace. The image of him alone in that cold, dark building haunted her. She knew it was a long shot, knew Scarlet's likely reaction, but she had to try. Taking a deep breath, she found Scarlet scrolling distractedly through her phone on the sofa. "Scarlet," Grace began tentatively. "I was thinking about Daniel." Scarlet didn't look up. "What about him?" she asked, her tone bored. "He's sleeping in that abandoned building site near campus." Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not safe. It's getting colder. I was wondering, just for a little while, maybe he could stay here on the floor." Scarlet's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "Are you insane, Grace?" she shrieked, leaping to her feet. "Bring that street rat into our home, into my space. Absolutely not over my dead body. Have you lost your mind? He has nowhere else to go," Grace pleaded, standing her ground despite trembling slightly. "He could freeze Scarlet or get hurt." And that's my problem, how Scarlet spat her voice, laced with a venom that went beyond simple annoyance. "Why him? Why are you wasting your time, your energy, our space on someone like that? While I'm here struggling, trying to make something of myself, you're out collecting strays." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of raw envy surfacing. "Is it because he's handsome? Do you think cleaning him up will magically turn him into a prince? Get him out of your head. Focus on getting us out of this dump, not dragging more problems in." "He's a human being," Grace cried, tears stinging her eyes. "He deserves basic shelter, basic safety." The argument raged, voices rising, the small apartment shrinking around their fury, unseen, unheard, just outside the thin apartment door. Daniel stood frozen. He had waited, hoping to catch Grace for a moment, perhaps to thank her again. Instead, he'd heard Scarlet's cruel words, her contemptuous dismissal of him. And worse, he'd heard Grace's impassioned, desperate defense. He heard the sacrifice she was willing to make, the venom she endured, all for a stranger, a lie. The weight of his deception pressed down on him, suffocating. He turned silently and melted back into the evening shadows, the sounds of the argument echoing behind him. Inside, the shouting finally subsided, leaving a heavy, wounded silence. Scarlet stood rigid, her face flushed, breathing heavily. Grace felt utterly defeated, yet strangely resolute. She didn't know how, but she couldn't leave Daniel out there. She looked at Scarlet's closed-off expression, the chasm between them, now seemingly unbridgeable. As Scarlet stormed off towards the tiny bedroom, slamming the door, Grace sank onto the worn armchair, staring out the window at the indifferent city lights, her heart aching with worry for the young man, alone in the cold, dangerous night. The fragile peace Grace had carved out for Daniel shattered 2 days later. The call came from an unknown number, a hurried voice on the other end, explaining that a young man matching Daniel's description had been found injured near the abandoned construction site. He'd been attacked, robbed, and thankfully brought to the university clinic by a passerby. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Grace. She dropped everything and ran her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She burst into the small clinic, scanning the beds frantically until she saw him. Daniel lay pale against the white pillows, his face adorned with fresh bruises, a bandage wrapped around his forearm. He was conscious, his eyes finding hers with a flicker of pained recognition. Will he be okay?" Grace asked the attending nurse, her voice trembling. The nurse offered a reassuring smile. "He's stable. Mostly bruises and a nasty cut. Thankfully nothing broken." But she added, her expression turning serious as she looked from Grace to Daniel. "He told us where he was staying. Young lady, that abandoned building is incredibly dangerous. He can't go back there. This could have been much, much worse." Grace turned to Daniel, her fear solidifying into resolve. "Did you hear that? You are not going back there. It's not safe." Daniel sighed, wincing as he shifted. "Grace, I appreciate it. But where else can I go? I can't impose on you. Scarlet would—" "I don't care about Scarlet right now." Grace cut him off, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "You were attacked. You could have been killed. You are coming home with me until we figure something else out." End of discussion. His resistance crumbled under the force of her determination. Later that afternoon, supporting a still wobbly Daniel, Grace helped him back to the apartment, her mind racing with how to handle the inevitable confrontation with Scarlet. As she unlocked the door, bracing herself, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Scarlet. "Hey crazy, spur-of-the-moment thing. Found super cheap. Bus tickets to visit Aunt Clara upstate. Needed a break. Be back Tuesday. Don't burn the place down." Grace stared at the screen, disbelief warring with overwhelming relief. A temporary reprieve. A miracle. She's gone. Grace breathed, showing Daniel the message. Until Tuesday. A visible wave of relief washed over Daniel's bruised face. He sank onto the worn armchair, his vulnerability starkly apparent. "Thank you, Grace," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, really. For the next few days, an uneasy calm settled over the apartment. Daniel rested recovering, while Grace juggled her studies and library shifts, the financial pressure a constant hum beneath the surface. Then came the call from home. Her mother's voice was strained, relaying news of a devastating flash flood that had wiped out a significant portion of their small farm's crops. There would be no money for tuition this semester. They were struggling even to cover their own immediate needs. Grace listened numb, the floor seeming to drop out from beneath her. The possibility of having to abandon her studies, her one clear path towards a different future, felt like a physical blow. That evening, unable to hide her distress, she confided in Daniel, tears finally spilling over as she explained the situation. He listened intently, his usual observant gaze filled with deep sympathy, and something else, a quiet resolve. When she finished wiping her eyes, he attempted to lighten the mood. He sat up straighter, adopting a mock-serious pastoral tone. "Fear not," he declared, raising an imaginary staff. "Pastor Daniel is on the case. By the power vested in me, I decree that a helper, a financial miracle shall arrive very soon. You must have faith." Despite her misery, a small, watery laugh escaped Grace. "Oh really, Pastor Daniel?" Indeed, he nodded solemnly, though a twinkle danced in his eyes. "Just watch." Grace knew he was just trying to cheer her up, but later that night, she saw the glow of a cheap burner phone illuminate his face as he sat hunched in the dark living room long after she'd gone to bed. She heard snippets of a low, urgent conversation, mentioning account numbers, untraceable transfers, anonymity protocols, technical jargon that sounded utterly foreign coming from him. She drifted back to sleep, assuming it was just fatigue playing tricks on her ears. 2 days later, Grace walked into the university finance office, palms sweating, ready to plead her case. The administrator looked up. Her details frowned at the screen, then smiled. "Grace, there seems to be no issue here. Your tuition fees for the semester have been paid in full." Grace stared. "Paid? But how by who?" The administrator shrugged, checking again. "It just shows paid. Anonymous donation, cleared yesterday. You're all set." Speechless, Grace stumbled out of the office, her mind reeling. Paid anonymously. It felt impossible. She practically flew back to the apartment, bursting through the door. "Daniel, you won't believe this. My fees. They've been paid. Someone paid them." Daniel looked up from the old paperback he was reading, a calm, knowing smile playing on his lips. "See?" he said softly, closing the book. What did I tell you? Mysterious ways. Grace. Perhaps Pastor Daniel. He gave a slight wink. Has friends in high places. They laughed together. The relief immense, though Grace couldn't shake the bewildering mystery of her unknown benefactor. Just as a semblance of normalcy seemed possible, her phone rang again. It was her mother. Her voice choked with worry. Her father had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The doctors were concerned. She needed to come home immediately. Torn between her relief about the fees and gut-wrenching fear for her father, Grace knew she had no choice. She packed a small bag, assuring a worried Daniel she'd only be gone a day or two, urging him to stay inside and avoid trouble. He watched her leave, an inexplicable sense of unease settling over him. Grace had barely been gone 24 hours when the apartment door unlocked unexpectedly. Scarlet breezed in, dropping her bags, looking surprised to see Daniel alone. Well, well, she drawled, surveying him. Look who's still here. Thought Grace would have shipped you back to the kennel by now. Her eyes travelled over him, taking in his recovering state, the cleaner clothes Grace had lent him. A slow, calculating smile spread across her face. You know, Daniel, she began, her voice dropping to a husky, suggestive tone. You actually clean up quite nicely. Much better than I expected. She sauntered closer. Grace is sweet, but bless her heart, she's so plain, so poor. While she's away, maybe you and I could entertain ourselves. I know how to have real fun. Daniel met her gaze, his own expression unreadable, almost bored. Her over-the-top attempt at seduction, the cheap perfume suddenly cloying, felt pathetic. I'm not interested, Scarlet, he stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then irritation. Excuse me. Don't you know who I am? What I could offer you? I know exactly who you are. Daniel replied, his voice chillingly calm. Someone who lies about everything, including who they are. Someone who values money over decency. Now, if you'll excuse me. Scarlet's face contorted with fury and deep humiliation. The rejection, so blunt, so dismissive, cut deeper than any argument. Get out! She hissed, her voice trembling with rage, but her eyes held a new, cold light. It wasn't just expulsion anymore. It was malice. Get out now! But don't you think for 1 second this is over. Nobody treats me like this. I'll make you regret it. I'll make you both pay. Daniel didn't need to hear more. He saw the shift, the dangerous glint in her eyes. This wasn't just about him anymore. Her threat included Grace. He calmly gathered the few belongings he had, mostly items Grace had lent him, slung the small bag over his shoulder, and walked towards the door without a backward glance. He wasn't just being kicked out. He was making a strategic retreat. He needed a new plan, a safe place, before Scarlet unleashed whatever venom she was concocting. The night air felt cold as he stepped back onto the street. The temporary sanctuary shattered the future, uncertain, and suddenly far more perilous. The night air still felt cold on Daniel's skin as he walked away from the apartment building, Scarlet's venomous threats echoing in his ears. He couldn't go back to the streets. Not now. Not with Scarlet actively plotting against him, and potentially Grace. Reaching into a hidden pocket, he retrieved the burner phone, his only link to his real life. There was a contingency plan, one he'd hoped never to use. A quick coded call later, a discreet car picked him up from an obscure corner, whisking him away from the life he had meticulously fabricated. He spent the next day orchestrating his transition back. He needed to secure a safe place, not just for himself, but potentially for Grace. His parents, Mr. Arthur Sterling and Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, were briefed. Their initial relief at his safety quickly tempered by the complex situation involving Grace and the vindictive Scarlet. The security job at their estate was activated. A ready-made cover story. Meanwhile, Grace returned from her brief, emotionally confusing trip home. Her father was fine. The illness, a misguided ploy by her worried parents to simply see her, only to face the chilling reality of Scarlet's barely concealed hostility. Daniel wasn't there. Grace felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She packed her few belongings quickly, the air thick with unspoken animosity. As she headed for the door, Scarlet, lounging on the sofa, didn't even look up, merely drawled, "Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Hope your pet beggar found a nice gutter to crawl back into." Grace didn't reply, simply closing the door firmly on that chapter of her life, following the address Daniel had carefully texted her, citing his new live-in security job. Grace found herself standing before imposing wrought-iron gates. Beyond them lay sprawling manicured lawns, fountains glistening in the afternoon sun, leading up to a mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. This was where Daniel worked. Disbelief warred with confusion. A uniformed guard waved her through after she gave her name. As she walked up the sweeping driveway, Daniel emerged from a side entrance, dressed not in rags, but in simple clean trousers and a shirt, looking less like a beggar and more like, well, not like the Daniel she knew. He looked relieved to see her, yet there was a new tension in his shoulders, a strained quality to his smile. "Grace, you made it," he said, his voice holding an unfamiliar mix of warmth and an anxiety. "Come, let me introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. They're very kind." He led her into the house, the opulent interior, marble floors, high ceilings, art-lined walls, stealing her breath away. In a sunlit drawing room, she met the Sterlings. Arthur Sterling, tall and distinguished, greeted her with a polite smile. Eleanor Sterling, elegant in silk, rushed forward, clasping Grace's hands. "Grace, my dear." "Welcome, Eleanor," gushed. "Daniel has told us such wonderful things about your kindness. Oh, you poor dear, living in that tiny student apartment. It must have been simply ghastly. Arthur, remember that dreadful little hotel in Monaco, where our suites were only adjoining. Utterly barbaric, Arthur." Sterling chuckled indulgently, asking Grace polite, slightly vague questions about her economics major, with well-meaning cluelessness. The sheer disconnect between their casual wealth and her recent reality was jarring. After tea served in delicate porcelain cups, the Sterlings exchanged a significant look. Mrs. Sterling leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Grace," she began, Daniel mentioned. "Well, he spoke very highly of your character, your integrity, your compassion, qualities we deeply admire." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Indeed. You see, my dear, we have a son, hard-working, successful, currently managing our affairs abroad. We've been searching for the right sort of young woman for him, someone grounded kind, someone who wouldn't be swayed merely by A status." Grace listened, confused, glancing at Daniel, who suddenly seemed intensely interested in the pattern on the Persian rug. And based on everything Daniel has told us, Eleanor continued, beaming, "We couldn't help but think you might be the perfect match for him. Would you perhaps consider getting to know him when he returns?" The air thickened. Grace stared at them, then at Daniel's rigid profile. "Marry? Your son?" she stammered. I'm very flattered, Mrs. Sterling, but I'm afraid I couldn't possibly. There's someone else." She risked a pointed look towards Daniel. "Ah, well, Mr. Sterling said, smoothly, showing no surprise. Completely understandable, my dear. We shan't press the matter. Later, finding a moment alone with Daniel in the vast, silent library, Grace confronted him, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel, what was that? Marry their son. Why did they ask me that? And why did you look like you were about to be sick? Daniel turned to face her, the borrowed calm finally shattering. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with a turmoil she'd never seen before. Grace, he began, his voice low and strained. There's so much I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the very beginning. He took a ragged breath. My name. It is Daniel. But I'm not a beggar. I never was. The words dropped into the silence like stones. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. They aren't my employers, they're my parents. Grace stared, uncomprehending. Your parents. But the street, the building site, your clothes. It was all a lie, Grace. He whispered the confession, tearing from him. A test. A deception. He looked utterly miserable, guilt etched onto his features. After a bad experience being used for my family's money. I became cynical, afraid. I wanted to find someone, just one person, who could see past appearances, who would show kindness without expecting anything in return. Someone who would care about me. The person, not the Sterling name or the bank account. He stepped closer, his eyes pleading for understanding yet filled with self-reproach. So my parents and I, we devised this plan, this awful, elaborate charade. Me living on the streets, testing people's reactions. He swallowed hard. I know it was wrong, Grace. The deception. It felt heavier every single day, especially with you, watching you sacrifice, worrying about it. It ate me alive. But I was so desperate to know if genuine kindness, genuine connection still existed. His voice cracked. Please understand, Grace. My feelings for you, the way I felt when you showed me kindness, when you defended me to Scarlet, when you worried about me. None of that was a lie. That was the only real thing in this entire mess. But the way I found it out, the lies I told, the way I played with your life, your emotions, I am so sorry for the pain this must be causing you. Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her. Lied all of it. A whirlwind of emotions slammed into her. Shock, disbelief, a white-hot surge of anger, followed by a cold wave of betrayal. Every memory, every shared moment was instantly recontextualized, tainted by the knowledge of his deception. Was the way he looked at her real? Was his vulnerability manufactured? The paid tuition fees? Was that just another calculated move in his game? So I was just an experiment. She whispered the words tasting like ash. A test subject in your twisted social study. Tears welled hot and furious. She felt stripped bare, her genuine compassion, suddenly feeling like foolish naivety. How could she have been so blind? Yet, beneath the anger, the hurt flickered the memory of his kindness. The intelligence in his eyes, the moments of connection that had felt undeniably real. The man she'd started to care for, perhaps even love. Was he the beggar or the billionaire? Or neither? She turned away, needing space, pacing the length of the opulent library, her mind racing, trying to reconcile the Daniel she thought she knew with the stranger standing before her. He watched her, his expression agonized, making no move to stop her, giving her the space she clearly needed. After what felt like an eternity, she stopped her back still to him, tears streaming silently now. He took a hesitant step closer. "Grace," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. He sank to one knee, not with practiced ease, but with a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own turmoil. He held out no ring, just his heart, metaphorically bare. I know I don't deserve it. I know I broke your trust in the worst way possible, but everything I felt and everything I feel for you is the truest thing I know. You saw me when I was nothing, and you treated me like I was everything. You are the most incredible person I have ever met. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading, I love you, Grace, despite the lies I started with. I love you. Please, when you're ready, could you ever consider a future with me? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered. Grace slowly turned, looking down at him at the confession, the plea, the impossible situation. Her heart felt shattered, yet strangely. Not empty, the proposal raw and uncertain, waited suspended in the wreckage of his deception, its fate resting entirely in her trembling hands. Grace didn't give Daniel an answer that day in the library. The weight of his confession, the shattering of her perceived reality, needed time to settle. To his credit, Daniel understood. He didn't push, didn't pressure. He simply remained present quietly, demonstrating a patience and respect that spoke volumes more than grand gestures could. He answered every question she had, peeling back the layers of his life, his family's business dealings, his past fears, holding nothing back. He laid himself bare, acknowledging the deep flaw in his initial approach, the arrogance of his test, the pain his deception had undeniably caused. But he didn't just talk. A few days later, he approached Grace tentatively, not with another apology, but with a proposal of a different kind. He presented preliminary plans for a charitable foundation funded by a significant portion of his personal trust, dedicated specifically to providing resources, shelter, and job training for homeless youth and those aging out of the city's foster care system. I want to do something real. He explained, his gaze earnest, something tangible, your compassion. It showed me how much need there is and how blind I'd allowed myself to become. I'd be honored if you would help guide this, Grace. Your perspective is invaluable. He suggested naming it something simple, perhaps the Beacon Initiative, a quiet nod to the light her kindness had shone into his disguised world. His commitment was evident, not just in the paperwork, but in the hours he poured into it, seeking out experts, genuinely listening. It was a concrete act of atonement, using his privilege not just for himself, but channeling it towards the very issue that had first brought them together. Grace saw the effort, the sincerity. She also saw him try one morning to make a simple pot of coffee in the main kitchen, resulting in a hilariously overflowing machine and grounds everywhere, much to the silent, wide-eyed horror of Mrs. Sterling, who happened to walk in. Daniel's sheepish grin as he cleaned up the mess somehow felt more real, more humbly human than any perfectly executed apology. Slowly, tentatively, the broken pieces of Grace's trust began to mend. She saw the man behind the billionaire, behind the beggar. Flawed, yes, but also capable of deep remorse, genuine change, and profound love. One quiet evening, sitting together in the moonlit garden, she finally looked at him, her eyes clear. I need to know, she said softly, that you understand why the lie hurt so much. Not just that it was wrong, but the feeling of being a game, of my feelings, being evaluated. Daniel met her gaze, his own filled with raw honesty. I do, Grace, he said, his voice thick, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that you are not, and never were, a game to me. You were the unexpected truth I found while searching through lies. Can you forgive me? A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but this time It wasn't born of hurt or anger. It was release. "Yes, Daniel," she whispered. "Yes, I forgive you. And yes, I will marry you." The peace that settled between them wasn't instantaneous magic. It was quiet, strong, and deeply earned. Wedding preparations brought their own gentle humor, mainly from the clash between Eleanor Sterling's vision of a royal-scale event and Grace and Daniel's desire for something intimate and meaningful. "Darling, but everyone flies in ostrich feathers for the reception centerpiece," Eleanor had exclaimed at one point, utterly baffled by Grace's suggestion of simple wildflowers. In the end, they found a compromise. Their wedding wasn't a society spectacle, but a heartfelt celebration held in the Sterlings' expansive garden, attended by close family, including Grace's visibly proud, down-to-earth parents and friends. It was filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet understanding of a love story that had taken the most unconventional of paths. Life, however, casts long shadows. News filtered back to Grace months later, through hushed campus whispers and a brief, sad call from a mutual acquaintance. Scarlet's world had imploded. Her elaborate web of lies had unraveled spectacularly, deep in debt from trying to maintain her facade, exposed by creditors and abandoned by the generous gentlemen who quickly distanced themselves. She had eventually dropped out of university. The final crushing blow was returning home, not in triumph, but in disgrace, forced to confront the modest reality and the disappointed faces of the parents she had pretended didn't exist. There was no dramatic illness, just the quiet, bleak consequence of a life built on sand. Isolation, regret, and the stark emptiness left when the illusions finally dissolved. Grace felt a pang of sadness for the friend Scarlet once was a quiet acknowledgement of a potential tragically wasted, standing with Daniel on the terrace one evening, watching the city lights twinkle below. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. Their journey had been improbable, marked by deception and doubt. Yet they had found their way to an honest, resilient love. They knew challenges would still come, but they would face them together, grounded in the truth they had finally built. "It wasn't the easy way," Grace murmured. Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "No," he agreed softly, "but the best things rarely are." He looked down at her, his eyes filled with love and enduring gratitude. "Thank you for seeing me, Grace." Both times, their life stretched before them, a future built not on wealth or status, but on the hard-won bedrock of forgiveness, understanding, and the enduring power of a kind heart that dared to help a stranger, unaware of the extraordinary journey it would begin. What an incredible journey that began with a simple act of kindness on a busy street corner. Grace and Daniel's story reminds us that appearances can be deeply deceiving and true value often lies hidden beneath the surface, doesn't it? It truly makes you wonder. How often might we misjudge the book by its cover, completely unaware of the complex chapters concealed inside? Their path wasn't easy. It navigated deception, confronted difficult truths, and ultimately found its way to a hard-earned peace built on forgiveness and genuine change. It leaves us reflecting on the true meaning of wealth, the enduring strength of integrity, and the profound consequences, both positive and negative, that follow the choices we make. This story certainly left us with many thoughts, and we imagine it might have done the same for you. We'd love to hear what resonated most. Do you believe Daniel's drastic test? His elaborate deception was ultimately necessary for him to find genuine love free from greed, or was the risk and the hurt caused simply too high a price? Share your perspective in the comments below. We truly value hearing your thoughts. And speaking of value, we pour our hearts into crafting these narratives and are always striving to make them better. If you have any constructive feedback on today's story, the characters or the way it was told, perhaps something you would have liked to see explored differently, please do let us know in the comments. Your insights are incredibly important and help us grow. If Grace and Daniel's journey touched your heart today, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps support the channel. And if you believe this story might resonate with others, feel free to share it. Of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on our next exploration into the complexities of life and the human heart. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay thoughtful, and stay blessed.